In the last episode of BendyBrain, we explored how the brain and the body struggle to communicate, how sometimes the brain misinterprets what's happening in a variable body, how this mismatch can be experienced as a glitch, and this glitch can feel like anxiety. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into one condition in which this is the case. It is all about gravity. The brain and the body are always trying to be in control. They need blood to go to the heart, blood to go to the brain in order to make things happen. Though sometimes this goes wrong and the blood cannot get back to the heart, it cannot get to the brain. It pools in the feet for people with lax connective tissue. And for them, it seems as though they are allergic to gravity. As I stand up, gravity exerts its force. The blood pools in my feet. And because I have lax connective tissue, it struggles to return to the heart. A whole cascade happens that activates the flight and fright nervous system. I begin to feel dizzy, lightheaded. I can feel my heart beating. If this feels familiar, then maybe you should think about POTS. POTS stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia syndrome. And it's sort of what it says in the title. Postural means going from one position to another. Orthostatic is an interesting word. So some people will be familiar with the idea of orthopedics, which is a medical specialty concerned with bones. Orthopedics literally means straighten the child. So ortho means rigid, standing upright. So postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is when you have a heart rate rise on standing, but you also have it in other situations like eating a large meal or going into a hot environment like having a hot shower or a hot bath. So that's literally what POTS means. But in terms of what it is it is a collection of feelings in the body that are interpreted in the brain that are to do with the involuntary nervous system. So it's things like feeling your heart racing, dizziness, lightheadedness, blurred vision, and actually increasingly recognised as important to patients the idea of brain fog. So what we wonder is, the body and the brain, they're supposed to work together in harmony to keep everything regulated. The whole idea of the body really is this thing called homeostasis, which is making sure that everything is functioning properly and doesn't get out of balance. So what happens in POTS is, say, everyone has this, there is an experience, for example, of feeling dizzy when you stand up. But what we know, and this was research that we did, we took 80 people, half of them had anxiety and half of them had hypermobility in each group, so half of the anxious people had hypermobility, half of them didn't. Is that the body is supposed to regulate itself. So we tested what happened to people's heart rates when they stood up. And if you weren't anxious and you weren't hypermobile, your heart rate went up by about 6-7 beats per minute. But if you were hypermobile and anxious, your heart rate went up by nearly 20 beats per minute. So what it seems is that, like in conditions like postural tachycardia syndrome, your body is responding more strongly than you would expect. So it's like the thermostat is tuned very highly. So a slight
trigger, like standing up or being in a hot environment, is actually promoting a big shift and change in your heart rate and blood pressure. And when your heart rate changes like that, you get this whole cascade of involuntary nervous system responses. So how do we test for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome? This is Laura. So what sort of things do you experience when you stand up like that?
I feel very hot. I do feel dizzy. Very kind of irritable. It seems like sensory issues kind of get heightened, if that makes sense. Yeah, just very kind of not with it for a minute or so.
Do you have any changes to your vision?
Sometimes, yeah, it's a little bit blurry sometimes, yeah.
Blurry. Do you ever feel your heart beating in your chest?
Yes, I've had a regular heartbeat before.
But specifically when you stand up, do you get a feeling of your heart beating?
Sometimes, yes. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do is Lucy and I are going to get you comfortable on the tilt table. What we're going to do is ask her to lie down on a special couch. This couch is called a tilt table. And when she's lying there, we'll take various measurements of heart rate and blood pressure as a baseline. Then, after we have taken these measurements and done some tests, breathing exercises, counting, that sort of thing, we will then simulate standing. This is a challenge to the body of the involuntary nervous system by tilting the table to 60 degrees. We will then take the same measurements again and perform some tests. If the heart rate rises in a sustained fashion for more than 30 beats per minute, then a diagnosis of POTS can be made. Come on, let's go and get some things. So to find out more about what it's like to live with this condition, postural tachycardia syndrome, I'm going to meet up with Lorna.
We're interested in some muffins. What sort of muffins do you have?
I've got.
So Lorna, we know each other from work. We work in the same service, and we're both interested in the physical health issues that go with neurodivergence. When was it, or how was it, that you realised that you were having physical health problems yourself? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it was sort of a little bit disjointed and sort of muddled with various things, but I think it's now with hindsight, it was probably around like 2012 when I was in like my early 20s.
So you were in your early 20s?
Yes, and I up till then had really active life. So I sort of competed at top level in karate. I also rode horses every day. Being active was just the massive part of how I was. And then I remember that I had sort of some kind of virus or illness. I think may have been glandular fever. And at its worst, I was pretty much bedbound and sort of crawling. I was sort of reduced to crawling around my flat from the toilet to my bed.
Wow.
And yeah, it was things like, so before with this was probably before that deterioration, but with riding horses, I found I wasn't able to stay sitting up on a horse. I was becoming dizzy and breathless. And also I was finding I was having problems with actually getting on a horse. And it was actually, so where POTS as an explanation first entered the horizon, it was 2018, so probably a good 5 or 6 years after like what I see as the onset of the symptoms. And it was just that I'd moved areas and I was seeing a new GP. And I think back then, I certainly had never heard of POTS, and I don't think it was quite as well known. I think since there's a bit more knowledge out there since like people have developed POTS symptoms following COVID-19.
Yes.
So, but back then, a lot of doctors hadn't heard of it, or if they had varying sort of opinions on what it was and whether it existed or not. And so, yeah, my GP sort of over a period of time, I think because I sort of, while going there for my mental health, I was just mentioning sort of things that were happening in terms of my physical health. Like it was things like standing up to cook, that I had a fainting episode related
So
to
you
that.
were like, was it a hot environment whilst you were cooking?
Yeah, and just standing on my feet.
Yes. What do you think your relationship is to gravity?
Yeah, I've heard of people saying like being gravity intolerant. I definitely could relate to that when I was sort of in my most symptomatic, because it felt like I was sort of seeing most of the world like looking at the sky or the ceiling because of the amount of time. I think, yeah, that definitely does sort of resonate, whereas now maybe I feel a bit more like it. I do have more tolerance for it.
But you've had to build it up.
Yeah, definitely.
This is Lucy. Lucy was one of my master's students, and now she is one of our PhD students in the Department of Clinical Neuroscience at Brighton and Sussex Medical School.
So Lucy, what role does sensation, trying to understand what's happening in the body, play in all of this?
We forget that the brain is essentially a sensory computational organ. It's just trying to your brain is a dark box in a room that has no input from the outside. It's receiving different waveforms and different messages from the outside world that it has to compute and understand. And so if you have a hypermobile body, that might have more variability in that signal, or if you're neurodivergent and your senses might be heightened, or, then you may have more difficulties in integrating that signal. And the autonomic nervous system has it uses both sensory input as well as input from the organs from within the body, as well as having an output signal to make the changes that it thinks it needs to maintain the homeostasis and the regulation that the body needs.
So what you're saying really is that when people have problems with the involuntary nervous system, like postural tachycardia syndrome, is that our natural adaptive processes, how we regulate ourselves moment by moment, are not necessarily happening because the signals aren't quite right, and that we are compensating in order to try and keep the system ticking over, but that compensatory process actually leads to symptoms that people find upsetting. Yeah. And the interesting thing is it's those very symptoms, the feeling of your heart beating in your chest, feeling lightheaded, possibly ringing in your ears, are what we think of as the experience of anxiety. But sometimes, when we feel anxious, we think to ourselves, oh, this must be that something bad's going to happen, or that I've done something wrong, or that I am going mad. But what we actually are finding is that it may be that we haven't figured out what's going on in our body. So I have this, common experience talking to patients whereby I thought I was anxious, but actually I was maybe too hot or my clothes were too tight.
So Lorna, so it was all sort of, as you say, the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. Because now you're working in our team, you've come here today to visit me and to have this talk. You've been on the bus. You've been kind of living every day sort of life and activities, and it sounds like before you were passing out multiple times a day, and that this type of thing just wouldn't have seemed possible. What is it that how did that happen? I'm really interested to know that.
Yeah, so I guess one of the first things that I did, which came quite easily was increasing fluid intake, mainly water.
And did I spot you've got a water bottle right there?
So this was sort of, I think it came quite naturally because I was just inclined to be thirsty all the time. But I found getting a 1 litre water bottle and carrying it out with you, they do the ones where they have like lots of different lines for the times, and I've never bothered with those because you never drink to the exact times on the bottle, and then
would that then be a bit annoying?
Yes.
Yes.
That's
you missed the wrong time.
So things like increasing the amount of salt in your diet, and I guess it was a bit unfortunate because I didn't actually really like the taste of salt. I still don't.
Is it too strong as a taste, like too sharp?
Yeah, I've just never liked it. I think it's sort of a generational thing in some ways, that in the past they used to always put salt on things, but I feel it takes away the flavour. But anyway, I guess something that I did do was, you know, when you go out, you find like little paper salt sachets in restaurants and that kind of thing. I get in a habit now that I stock up and put those in like the bag that I carry around with me.
Yes, your bag.
So when I eat anything, like have a meal, I will put 1 or 2 of those on, and that's quite quickly, that's sort of how it can, and it becomes habit. One of the first things I also did was getting like a shower stool, so being able to sit down, because I found that the steam and just the heat did tend to make me more symptomatic. So being able to sit down to shower did make a huge difference. And it's things like, sort of because POTS effects, I get dizzy, bending, and also putting my hands above my head. So I guess I had to, like, things like putting my shoes on, I've learnt to do from sitting. And I think it helped just to sort of have multiple places to sit, sort of patched around, sort of, where within my living space. And then also combined with that, things like, because of the issue of getting dizzy when reaching above my head, I sort of reorganized a lot of the cupboards and sort of storage so that everything that I needed immediate access was sort of level and I wouldn't have to reach for. And also I found that I have quite a well-stocked like bedside cabinet. So the whole idea of that is so I can do as much as possible with getting up in the morning slowly from bed, because it's a little bit better now, but generally I was better if first I'd go to sitting before I would do the first stand of the day, and that process could take like an hour. Wow. And that kind of thing. So that helped. There was,
what did you do about the heat?
Oh yes, so the heat. So I suppose I became a big fan of fans. So having like sort of fans circulating in my house. And this neck fan is more recent find, but this has been really good because I find that if my like neck and my head is cool, even if it's psychological, it feels like
I'm sure it's not. I think it's cool in the right parts of your body, isn't it?
That's it. Then it makes all of me feel a bit cooler.
So if it is that you feel odd, anxious, worried, but actually it's because you're dehydrated, hot, then drinking electrolytes could actually improve your mood. And wearing compression stockings could help you feel more emotionally regulated. And this means that we don't just rely on drugs that have lots of unpleasant side effects, or talking therapy, which although can be really helpful, sometimes when you're dysregulated in the moment is actually quite hard to access. So by understanding how the brain and body work together, we can help with regulation. And I think that that is so important.
Because the goal of interoception is so that your brain can know what is going on within the body so that it can regulate itself. But what some of Hugo Critchley's work has shown is that particularly in people with autonomic dysfunction, this interoceptive process that's most people it's regulatory, so they can work out what they're feeling and take action on it quite easily, may actually be dysfunctional and anxiogenic. So even that process.
So this involuntary system is causing people anxiety?
Yeah, and I think that frustration of not being able to work out what you're feeling may actually be because the system itself is causing anxiety, and so learning how to read your own signals and act on your own signals may be really challenging at first, but actually has huge therapeutic benefit too.
And we know that there are people who are working, and I mean, we're working on it in terms of interoceptive training that we did in ADAPT and in AD to help people get better aware at recognizing what's happening inside their body. But the other thing is neurodivergent people and hypermobile people, not only do they maybe struggle to make sense of what's happening in their body, and there's so much signal, but there's so much noise, it's hard to work out what the signal is. Neurodivergent people in particular, and this is often associated with autism, but is common in ADHD and other conditions, is this alexithymia, is difficulty understanding and naming emotion. So when you put these things together, the combination of difficulty understanding what's happening in your body, that sensory difficulty, with a difficulty in recognizing and naming emotion, you can see
and
that
a difficulty in regulating the autonomic nervous system is a feedback loop.
You can see it's a vicious circle that means that people are more prone to experiencing emotional difficulties. One of the other things that we showed was we did a brain imaging study, and I was saying about this kind of mismatch between what you think is happening and what is actually happening. Well, we calculated an index of that for the involuntary nervous system. And we found that there was this real kind of push-pull in the brain, that if you had greater mismatch, you had greater activity in parts of the brain that are involved in emotion processing and autonomic control, so involuntary nervous system control, the anterior cingulate, the sort of older, more emotional parts of the brain. And you had less activity in the frontal part of the brain, the sort of executive control center of the brain that puts on the brakes. So it really further goes to underscore that there is this kind of push-pull fight between regulation and overactivity. And that in hypermobility and neurodivergence, with this unpredictability and hypersensitivity, that we are more prone to mental and physical health problems. So what we did is we created this autonomic perceptual mismatch index, and you can see that it correlates with anxiety, and that there is an interaction, that it's correlating with anxiety in the hypermobiles, but not in the non-hypermobiles. So and you can see here in the hypermobile anxious, the autonomic perceptual mismatch is significantly higher than the hypermobile non-anxious and the non-hypermobile either anxiety variety. So we found that that correlated with various areas in brain, and you can see how it's completely different in the hypermobile and the non-hypermobile. But the POTS UK website has some really useful information, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's an excellent starting point, whether you have a diagnosis or not.
Yeah, and I think it also sort of looked at some of the sort of the interconnected conditions, like, for example, like mast cell activation syndrome and hypermobility. So it sort of helped almost to navigate.
So compared to how you were back then in sort of 2012, 2013, how do you feel about your life now?
Yeah, so it was a massive adjustment, but I suppose it's almost been a strategy as well, that it's one of the things that I do. It's about focusing on what you can do rather than what you can't. And I actually think, although yeah, there's a huge amount of loss that came about from having POTS, but I think in a way that it forced me to slow down.
Yes. You did say you were maybe doing a bit too much before.
Well, yeah, I think now I don't think how it's humanly possible. And take notice. So it's things like
Taking notice of the body. Yes.
yeah, and also taking notice of your surroundings, that I think I was just so driven, it was almost like an escape or a compulsion to keep myself so busy that I sort of
Wasn't
didn't
paying any attention.
address anything that was going on, and it caught up with me. And so I suppose connected to that, it's like that I now value being able to walk, even if, you know, that looks a bit different to how it used to, making the most of sort of the activity that I can do. Like some people have found things like swimming or cycling is better for POTS, or even like, which I have tried, walking across the swimming pool. It's sort of a hydrotherapy.
No, I have tried that.
Yeah.
Not for POTS, but for hypermobility related things, yes.
Yeah, and I think there is almost like, it has given me more of an appreciation. I think in many ways in the past I think like a lot of able-bodied people, I didn't really worry about my health at all. In fact, I don't think I worried enough. I sort of took my health for granted. Yeah, whereas now I think I really do appreciate like what I am able to do. And it's sort of about, finding ways. I guess sometimes it's also a sense, I think with any chronic illness, that you have, like, some people talk about it in terms of spoons, but having a limited amount of energy. I think because I like unicorns, I see it as I have limited unicorn vials of energy. And so having to be quite mindful about how you spend your time, and how to pace it, and that kind of thing. And I guess with a lot of it's a minefield, but also being able to sort of communicate your needs to others and set boundaries. I guess that it brought some important lessons in many ways. I guess it's part that I'm more aware of how physical health might be part of the picture, and I go in with that.
Another bit of the whole puzzle.
Because that's so part of what I do is sort of looking at autistic identity, what that diagnosis means for them, and I think that often the physical health elements are often the missing bit of the puzzle, and it seems to make sense to people. I think in the same way that like a neurodivergent diagnosis can almost provide people with the relief of an explanation, or in order to build an understanding of why they are the way they are. I think there can be a similar sort of feeling when you're able to sort of make sense or put words to what's happening. And I think in relation to hypermobility, and I think it makes a lot of sense to, well, it has made sense to me and a lot of other people, that if you've got a differently wired brain, then it makes sense that you'd have a differently wired body as well.
But I think what I have noticed is in talking to patients who have, you know, a number of different difficulties, or what they think of as difficulties. So they may have a diagnosis of anxiety, they may have a diagnosis of depression, they may have a complex trauma, they may have eating disorder, they may have seizures, they may be autistic, they may have ADHD. And they may have gastro problems that they don't understand. They may get dizzy when they're standing up. They may have weird random allergies, and they think to themselves, oh my, I have 12, 15 different problems. And then when you think, well, actually, all of these problems are related or explained perhaps by this underlying difference in connective tissue, I think for a lot of people, it's actually quite validating, because it reduces the noise. It's like, how could I have, 12 unrelated problems? You're like, actually, yes, I have a lot of difficulties, but they're all made sense by how my body and brain are interacting, because I have a particular body type.
And there is so much more that we need to understand about what those connective tissue differences actually are and how they are interpreted by the brain. And
Oh, yes. I mean, there is a lifetime and many more lifetimes of work to be done to really understand it. But I think that it's going to be key in understanding what we think of as mental health in the future. So what we think of as depression, what we think of as, psychosis, bipolar disorder, that all of those experiences may in fact be related to some of these intersections. And that if we better understand how the brain and body are working in hypermobility and neurodivergence, we are going to better understand why people experience mental health problems. And if we understand it better, then we can help people in the right way. For more info, check out POTS UK website. There's a wealth of information there and also on the BendyBrain Linktree. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and see you next time.